A human tactician held captive on an alien warship, a ruthless ambush that wasn't supposed to happen, and a queen marked for death by someone she trusted most. When the stars burn and betrayal runs deep, one unexpected alliance will decide the fate of an empire. He was never meant to be a hero, but when war crashes through the void, sometimes the only way to survive is to fight for someone else's future. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Let's move toward wonderful story. Jalen stood by the wide, curved window of the observation deck, the stars drifting past like quiet whispers in the dark. The alien ship, Celestara, moved with silent grace through the emptiness of space, its engines humming in a rhythm that had become strangely familiar to him. For the past 3 months he had been an honored guest aboard this vessel, a polite way of saying he was not free. His quarters were comfortable, even luxurious by human standards, but the invisible walls of duty and suspicion surrounded him all the same. Every day he walked the same path along the transparent walls of the observation chamber. 8 steps, turn, 12 steps, turn again. It was a routine that helped him think, helped him feel in control. He wasn't sure if it was his mind or his instincts, but something always told him to be ready, even here. Behind him, Scholar Fenn, the ship's lead biologist and his only real companion, watched him with quiet interest. The tall, pale green alien had narrow, curious eyes and long fingers that moved gracefully across glowing blue panels of data. Fenn never spoke with the condescension others did. He didn't look at Jalen like a creature to be studied, but like a puzzle to be solved, with respect. "You walk more when you are troubled," Fenn noted gently. "Your heart beats faster, your eyes stay fixed in thought." Jalen offered a small smile. "Where I come from, we think better when we move. Long ago, our ancestors had to run to survive. Maybe thinking and running stayed together in our blood." Fenn nodded thoughtfully. Fascinating. Another layer to human adaptability. Jalen had grown used to being examined, tested, and questioned. It wasn't torture, not even close. But it wore on him in a different way. The crew respected him, but many did not trust him. He was the only human aboard, plucked from a failed diplomatic mission gone sideways. One mistake, one misunderstanding, and Earth's first contact with the alien confederation had turned into a delicate detainment. No prison bars, just locked doors and constant observation. The door to the chamber hissed open. Captain Varan stepped, inside flanked by 2 guards in shining violet and silver armor. His tall frame and stern features gave him the look of a man who never smiled. He didn't like Jalen, and he made little effort to hide it. "The tactician will attend the drill," Varan said coldly. Fenn raised a thin brow. It was not scheduled. Varan's gaze never wavered. "It has been now." Jalen sighed, but nodded. The strategy simulations were the only time he felt truly useful. Inside those glowing battle maps, he could prove that humans weren't primitives, that their minds were just as sharp as any species in the galaxy. He followed the guards into the strategy chamber, where a circular table projected a 3D map of a star system in full detail. Dozens of ships floated in formation, representing a standard defense around a moon base. Beside the display stood High Matron Solari. She turned, and the room seemed to shift with her. Tall, regal, and strong, Solari was the ship's leader, and one of the most respected military minds in her empire. Her violet-toned skin shimmered slightly under the room's lights, and her eyes, bright silver with flecks of gold, watched everything with razor focus. "So," she said, "the human strategist joins us." Jalen bowed his head slightly. "Hi, Matron. I hope I can offer something useful." "You've been full of surprises," she replied with no clear tone of praise or insult. "Let's see if it continues." The simulation began with Captain Varan guiding the fleet into a flawless formation. Every ship followed the rules, every move precise. But Jalen frowned. It was too clean, too predictable. When his turn came, he proposed something different. splitting the fleet into scattered groups, luring the attackers into the gaps. Varan laughed. That is not a strategy. That is chaos. But Jalen held firm. It's bait. You want the enemy to think you've made a mistake. You want them to come closer. He demonstrated how the scattered units would pull the attackers out of formation, then crush them in a trap. Silence followed. Then Silari spoke. Deception through disorder, she said. Clever. Before she could say more, alarms blared. Red lights flashed. The room plunged into sudden alert as a voice crackled through the speakers. Warning. Unidentified vessels approaching. Attack vector confirmed. The simulation vanished, replaced by a live battlefield map. Dozens of ships appeared from empty space, no warning, no signal. Panic stirred. Stealth systems, Varan muttered. They were cloaked. Silari's voice sliced through the noise. Raise shields. Prepare for combat. Get the guest back to his quarters. Jalen took a step forward, eyes locked on the display. Something wasn't right. The pattern of the enemy ships, the way they moved, it looked familiar, too familiar. They know your defenses, he said quietly. This isn't random, they planned this. Before Silari could respond, the ship rocked violently. The guards moved toward Jalen to remove him. Another explosion hit, knocking one off balance. Instinct took over. In a heartbeat, Jalen struck the guard's neck just hard enough to stun. The second reached for his weapon, but the blast had knocked him to the floor. Jalen ran, not for escape pods, but toward the command deck. He didn't know if Silari would welcome him or shoot him. But he knew one thing. He wasn't about to let the only people who had given him a chance fall to an ambush. Not when he could stop it. The corridors of the Celestara shook again as another blast struck the ship. Red lights flashed above and warning sirens echoed through the metallic halls. Jalen moved quickly, dodging a fallen beam and pushing forward. He wasn't entirely sure if the path he took would lead to the command deck, but instinct and memory guided him. He ducked under a damaged doorway, slid across the floor as gravity shifted briefly, and finally emerged into a hall he recognized. He was close. Voices shouted ahead. Jalen pressed himself against a wall, waiting. A group of armored guards passed by, heading the other direction, likely toward the breached hull sections. As soon as they were out of sight, he slipped out and ran toward the sound of orders being given. The doors to the command chamber were wide open, and smoke filled the air inside. Jalen stepped through the haze and found High Matron Silari standing, tall in the middle of the chaos, giving commands with calm precision. Redirect auxiliary power to shields. I want boarding sectors sealed now, she barked. Commander Varan stood nearby, blood running down one side of his face. He turned, shocked to see Jalen step into the room. You're supposed to be in containment, he shouted. I came to help, Jalen replied simply, stepping over broken panels. We don't need your help, human, Varan snapped, but Silari raised a hand. Let him speak, she said. Her voice was strained but steady. Jalen approached the main tactical display and pointed to the patterns on the screen. They're not hitting you randomly. Look at their formation. It's controlled, coordinated. They're targeting your weak points with exact precision. That means they've studied your defense systems. Silari narrowed her eyes. That would mean we've been betrayed from within. Jalen nodded. Yes. And if you keep fighting them the way you've trained your entire fleet, they'll win. They expect it. You suggest we throw away everything we know and trust your instinct instead? Varan growled. No, Jalen said calmly. I'm suggesting you adapt. Your systems are compromised, so don't use them. Fight them in ways they aren't prepared for. Silari looked back at the display, her jaw tight. She had to make a choice. Finally, she turned to Varan. Pull our forces from the main defense lines. Break them into smaller units and move through secondary corridors. We'll take back control piece by piece. That's madness, Varan protested. It's what they won't expect, she answered. She turned to Jalen. You're with me. The ship rocked again as they moved. Jalen followed Silari and a small team of guards through a hidden passage behind the command deck. The air was hot, and sparks flew from damaged wires. They passed sections where fighting had already occurred, bodies of both her crew and the invaders lying still. In these narrow corridors, it wasn't strategy that kept them alive, it was speed, reaction, and teamwork. Silari fought with a blade and pistol, her moves quick and sharp. Jalen stayed close, watching her back and signaling directions as they moved. At one point, he pulled her down just in time to avoid a shot from above. They fell hard against the wall, her body pressed briefly against his. Neither spoke, but something shifted in the silence between them. Then she rose, firing back, cutting down the attacker with precise aim. They continued forward, locating a relay control station. The tech there, a young crew member named Nira, had managed to keep some systems online. She showed them a partial map of the boarding zones. "They're moving in teams of 3, clearing each section one by one," she said, her voice shaking. "They're sweeping for you," Jalen told Silari. "They want confirmation you're dead." "We can't let that happen," she replied. "Nira, link what's left of the surveillance system to Jalen's communicator." As Nira worked, Silari turned to Jalen. "What's your plan?" "Hit their command chain," he answered. "Split them up, isolate their leaders, make them fight in the dark." "Unorthodox," she said, almost with a smile. "But effective," he replied. Their next hours were filled with tension and fire. Moving in small groups, they struck the mercenaries fast and disappeared before counterattacks could land. They used forgotten maintenance shafts and unused cargo tunnels to flank enemies. Jalen watched how Silari led, not just with strength, but with fierce loyalty to her crew. And she watched him with increasing respect, seeing how quickly he adapted to every challenge. During one fight, a blast grazed Jalen's side. He gritted his teeth but kept moving. Silari dragged him into cover, examined the wound, and without hesitation applied a healing patch herself. "Why didn't you run?" she asked quietly. "I don't run when there's something worth staying for," he said, holding her gaze. For a moment, something tender passed between them, quickly swallowed by the roar of distant gunfire. Their mission brought them to a deeper truth. Near the ship's encrypted communications hub, they found a coded message sent just before the attack. Jalen worked quickly to break it open. What they found shocked everyone. "This attack wasn't random," he said, voice cold. "This was planned by someone close to you." Silari read the signature on the message and closed her eyes. "First Consul Drennick, my advisor. He sold your location and security protocols," Jalen said. "He's arranged for my death," she whispered, "and someone else to take my place." Jalen gently touched her shoulder. "Then let's make sure that never happens." As explosions rocked the walls around them, they looked at each other, not as human and alien, but as allies, survivors, and something more. The fire hadn't broken them. It had forged something stronger, and now they would fight as one. The flickering lights of the damaged hallway cast long shadows across the metal walls as Jalen and Silari pressed forward, both alert and silent. Every corner could hide danger, and the sound of distant gunfire reminded them the battle for the Celestara was far from over. But now, they weren't just trying to survive. They were chasing the truth, one that could change everything. Their path took them to the lower communication deck, a rarely used section of the ship filled with silent consoles and backup relay systems. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of scorched wiring. Jalen's side still ached from the earlier injury, but he pushed the pain aside. His focus was on the encrypted signal they had traced, one that had been sent just before the attack. It had come from inside the ship. Silari secured the doorway behind them while Jalen moved to a console. "This is where the message was sent," he said, fingers flying over the glowing keys. Encrypted, routed through several relays, someone tried very hard to hide it. "Can you break it?" she asked. "I can try." As he worked, Silari stood nearby, her weapon ready and her thoughts racing. The possibility of betrayal was like a crack in the foundation of everything she believed. The idea that someone from her inner circle could have sold her out, it burned deeper than any wound. She had trusted her officers, her advisors. One of them had given the enemy the keys to her kingdom. After several long minutes, the screen flashed and lines of decoded text appeared. Jalen read quickly, eyes narrowing. "It's not just a tip-off," he said grimly. "It's a full plan. Entry points, defense weaknesses, security overrides, and the target is you. Solari leaned in, reading over his shoulder. Then she saw the sender's ID code. Her hand trembled slightly. First Consul Drennick, she whispered. The name hit like a stone. Drennick had been with her since the beginning of her leadership. A quiet voice of reason in council chambers, a steady presence in times of stress. She had confided in him, trusted him with matters of state and strategy. And now, it seemed, he had tried to end her. He was going to report my death at the Stellar Conclave, Solari said, voice low, then claim control in the name of peace. Jalen stood and turned to her. This isn't just betrayal, this is a coup. The mercenaries were hired to make it look like a pirate attack. No one would question your death if the ship had gone. Dark. Solari clenched her jaw. Not only did he betray me, he betrayed the entire fleet. The lives we've already lost, he traded them for power. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Jalen quickly disabled the console and took cover. Solari ducked behind a pillar. A squad of enemy soldiers passed by without noticing them. Once, the sound faded, they moved again. This time toward the emergency maintenance shaft that would lead them to the forward engineering deck. They climbed one after another through the tight, vertical tunnel. Solari noticed Jalen's movements slowing and finally spoke. You're hurt. I'm fine, he replied, but his voice was strained. She stopped above him and reached down. Let me help. He hesitated but took her hand. As she pulled him upward, he looked up at her, breathing heavily. You don't have to do this, I'm just a human. You've got a crew, a command, a future. You saved my life more than once today, she said, meeting his gaze. You didn't run, that means something. When they reached the top, the two collapsed briefly in a quiet corner of the corridor. Solari retrieved a small healing kit from her belt and began patching Jalen's wound. Her touch was careful, and for a moment the chaos around them seemed to fade. You know, Jalen said softly, where I come from, betrayal like this. It destroys people, not just governments or missions. It tears them apart inside. Solari paused, the healing salve still in her hand. It does here too. He looked at her, seeing more than the leader of a great ship. He saw someone trying to stay strong despite the pain. You're holding together better than most would. I have to, she replied, but that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. They sat there for a moment, breathing together, drawing strength from silence. Then the ship jolted and the spell was broken. Come on, Solari said, standing. If we can get to the forward engines, we might be able to stop Drennick's signal before it reaches the capital. They moved fast, navigating smoke-filled passageways and dodging more patrols. Along the way, they found signs of damage and small groups of survivors fighting to hold off the enemy. Jalen offered quick suggestions, rerouting power, sealing bulkheads, and the crew followed without question. Word had spread of the human who stood beside the matron. By the time they reached the engine control chamber, it was clear the enemy had already been there. Broken panels, slashed wires, and fallen crew told the story. But there was hope. The central core still flickered with power. Jalen rushed to the controls. If we can use this core to hijack Drennick's transmission, we can send a warning to the Conclave, he said. Expose the truth before it's too late. Solari stood behind him, her weapon ready. Then do it. As he worked, she watched the doorway, but part of her mind lingered on the man before her. He had no duty to her people, no reason to risk himself. Yet here he was, shoulder to shoulder with her in the darkest moment. She didn't know what the future would hold, but in the shadows of betrayal, Jalen had shown her something real. And that, she realized, was worth fighting for. The Celestara drifted through space, wounded but not broken. Its lights flickered, systems ran on backup power, and smoke still lingered in the halls. But inside, life stirred with purpose. The ship's crew, battered and grieving, moved with a renewed sense of urgency. In the control chamber, Jalen stood beside High Matron Solari as the final data streamed across the screen. The message had, been sent. Drennick's betrayal was exposed. His voice, once trusted, now echoed across the stars as a traitor's confession. The proof of his alliance with mercenaries, the detailed plan to take Solari's place, and the real motive behind the attack, all of it was broadcast to the capital and every allied fleet. Solari let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "It's done," she said quietly. Jalen nodded, leaning slightly on the console. He was pale, the wound in his side still healing, but his eyes were clear. "Now we see if they believe it." "They will," she said, watching the stars through the nearby viewport, "because they must." 3 days later, the Celestara, limping but operational, entered orbit above the Vidari capital. Twin suns cast long golden beams over the shining spires of the city below. It was the day of the Stellar Conclave, an event held once a generation where leaders from across the galaxy gathered to witness the passing of power or the strengthening of peace. Inside the great plaza, a crowd of thousands stood in silence. The news of Solari's supposed death had already reached them, thanks to Drennick's manipulated broadcasts. He now stood at the central platform, dressed in ceremonial robes, preparing to claim her place. His voice echoed through the plaza as he spoke of loss, of duty, and of stepping forward in the Empire's time of need. Then a second voice broke through, strong, clear, and unmistakably hers. Enough lies. All heads turned as Solari stepped onto the stage, dressed in her formal armor. Her injuries still visible, but her presence commanding. Jalen walked beside her, wrapped in a long cloak to hide the fresh scars, his steps careful but steady. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Drennick's expression froze, shock and fear washing over his face. Solari raised a hand and the holograms flickered to life. Images appeared above the crowd, transcripts, recordings, security footage, and communications between Drennick and the mercenaries who attacked her ship. His voice, his orders, his face. They told a truth, louder than any words. The council members rose from their seats, murmuring in outrage. Drennick tried to speak, but the damage was done. Council guards surrounded him within moments. He was stripped of title and taken away in silence. Justice had found him. The crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in applause, relief, pride, and something more filled the air. They hadn't just witnessed a failed betrayal. They had seen a leader return from death with strength, and beside her, a stranger who had stood by her when all odds were against him. Jalen stepped forward, the spotlight unexpectedly on him. He glanced at Solari, who gave him the smallest nod. He cleared his throat. "I'm not from your world," he began, voice steady. "But I've seen what loyalty looks like. I've seen what it means to lead not through fear, but through courage. And I've seen someone who could have left me behind choose to fight beside me instead." He paused. High Matron Solari did not survive because of luck. She survived because she believed in her people, and they believed in her. I'm just honored I got the chance to stand with her. The crowd applauded again. This time, it wasn't just for Solari. It was for Jalen too. For the human who had stood in the fire and not flinched. Later, as the stars rose and the suns dipped below the horizon, Solari found Jalen standing alone on one of the palace balconies. Below, light shimmered over the capital. Music played somewhere in the distance. Jalen looked tired but peaceful. "Quite the speech," she said, approaching him. "I was never good with crowds," he replied with a small smile. "You did? Well," she said gently. He turned to her, watching the way her eyes caught the starlight. "So what happens now?" Solari was quiet for a moment. "The galaxy knows the truth. A traitor has been stopped, but that's only one battle. There will be others. Rebuilding trust, guiding our future, those are slower wars. You'll win them," Jalen said simply. "Not alone," she replied, her voice softer now. He looked at her, sensing something deeper in her words. "Are you asking me to stay?" She stepped closer. "I'm not asking as a leader. I'm asking as someone who's come to respect you, trust you, and, if I'm honest, someone who doesn't want to imagine the days ahead without you in them. He studied her face, her strength, her vulnerability, and felt something rise in his chest. A quiet certainty. Then I'll stay. A smile touched her lips. She reached for his hand, fingers brushing his palm before gently holding it. As the wind moved through the open balcony and the stars shimmered above, two figures, once from distant worlds, stood side by side, united not by politics or duty, but by something stronger: trust, loyalty, and a bond forged in the darkest hours of a ship under siege. From that night forward, their names were spoken together and stories told across systems, of how one human and one alien leader changed the course of history, not with fleets or weapons, but with courage, choice, and the belief that hope can rise, even from ruin. A new dawn had come, not just for the Celestara, but for them both.